is TechStrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I've got a company that we haven't covered before on TechStrong TV, or at least not in a really long time, ActiveState. And we're going to hear all about them. I want to introduce you first to their CTO, Scott Robertson. Hey Scott, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Alan, nice to meet you, and thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you on here. So, Scott, we're going to jump into ActiveState in just a minute, and you guys announced some really big news yesterday. But before we do, let's give people a little background on the Scott Robertson story.
Oh, sure. I'm CTO of ActiveState. I've been in software development for over 20 years now. I was actually doing the math last night. It's getting close to 30. It's kind of getting a little on the
Yeah, I know
side.
how that goes.
Yeah, and always a big open source enthusiast. That was even from my very first job. I was the person advocating bringing that in and how it was going to change the world and the way that we develop software. I founded 2 or 3 different startups, and now I'm working on over here at ActiveState on open source supply chain problems.
Which, look, is a top 3 on everyone's list, it seems, these days, right? The software supply chain issue, and it's primarily open source. So you're right, though. Think back 25 years, 30 years, and if I told you 99% of every company in the world is going to run open source software, you would have said, yeah, you're crazy.
Absolutely. That was the thing that was always the arguments I would get in. I'm like, this is going to change everything. We're always going to change development. And I was a crazy guy shouting at it from the hilltops. But
absolutely. It was a crazy notion back then.
You know, just crazy. But you know, how it's changed, I mean, specifically the software development. I had this conversation again the other day with some folks, is we've truly entered the age of the software factory, where software isn't some like bespoke kind of design one-off for each app that we create from scratch and have to kind of reinvent the wheel. You know, today software is assembled much like cars are. There are third-party suppliers, most of it open source, right? That we grab these components from various repos or containers and, you know, what have you, and put it all together into whether we're using microservices or classic CI/CD or what have you. You know, we grab all of these pieces together and we kind of stitch and glue it together with some custom code maybe, right, for what we don't get from components. But that represents a small minority of the actual code in most of these apps. You know, it's a very different model.
Oh yeah, I've heard by some accounts the code that you're shipping these days, only 1% of it is that proprietary IP that you're actually creating, and everything else is coming from contributors that that are all standing on the backs of giants here in order to keep advancing.
Well, also we built up,
with the advent of things like Git and repos like this and public repositories and from Java and JavaScript and everything else that you see out there, we've built up this massive library where, I mean, really, if it works good and it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why wouldn't you want to reuse it?
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, until you get like some of the things we've been dealing with in software supply chain.
Oh yeah, right. Oh yeah, I mean, that's been the case, right? We've shifted the corner. Now we're like, it makes sense to use everybody's collective contributions to get going. And it's funny you mention it. We, thinking back in the days, like ActiveState really got its business, back in the day when it was hard to find open source. Like literally the only way to do that was to go out to Usenet groups and ask, hey, what's everybody else happening? And then you get a link to some, website you download.
Arcane library or something somewhere.
Yeah. You bring it in and you wouldn't even think twice about using it. And now it's gotten to the state where it's become so convenient and ubiquitous to go out and use open source and bring it into your applications. You don't even think about it anymore. And then that's actually the source of the problem these days, is people aren't thinking about where this stuff is coming from. And that is what attackers are using, because we say open source, but reality is we're actually bringing down open source components and open source binaries. And you might think that the source code that you're using is vulnerability free, but the binary doesn't necessarily always match exactly what the code you're trying to bring in. And
then there are different versions.
Yeah.
Right. Depending what repo you pull it from, and especially with microservices where you're not even necessarily pulling code, you're pulling APIs, right? That are talking in some code or something that lives somewhere else altogether. And it's a crazy mixed up world, except for Lola. But what are you going to do here? This is the world we live in. So you mentioned ActiveState and sort of its early mission. I'm sure a lot of our audience has heard of ActiveState. A chunk of them may even be familiar, but there's a chunk who aren't. I know. Why don't, if you don't mind, Scott, give us a little bit of the ActiveState story.
Sure. I kind of touched on it a little bit, but we'll give you from the step up. So ActiveState was one of the early pioneers in helping enterprises adopt open source in their technology stacks. And our claim to fame was we helped port a lot of the dynamic scripting languages to the infrastructure and hardware that enterprises were using at the time. So whereas most of the enthusiasts were working on Linux, in enterprises, they were using big iron machines or Microsoft Windows and things like that. And so we help bring Perl and Python and Tickle to these other hardware infrastructures. And we ended up with a business model similar to what you saw with like the Linux vendors out there, Red Hat and SUSE and things like that. But what I've always liked to say is where they went vertical, they collected open source and they got it to work on Linux machines. We went horizontal, and we'd get collection of open source based on programming languages that we're using. And we would get that to work across the entire ecosystem for that language. And we'd have it built on many different hardware architectures, and we'd do porting if necessary and things like that. And so that was our early days, was just making it easy to use open source in these enterprise settings. And we built up a great subscription-based model of always delivering the software. And then over time, what you notice is the concerns. It went from what is this open source scary stuff that is coming into my enterprise to other types of concerns like, am I managing my licenses correctly? And now, more often than not, it's managing licenses correctly. And the other big concern was, how do I even build this stuff in the first place? And that still is our biggest one. It's we are the place when you're stuck in dependency hell, you come to ActiveState and we help get you out of it. We help give you all the right configurations if you're running multiple operating systems, but you need to keep everybody in sync. But where we see the world going now is the concerns about the consequences of using open source inside of these enterprise settings. So being able to figure out what is the provenance of this component? Did it come from the legitimate author, or is it coming from, has it been replaced in transit from the point where I'm getting it from a public repository all the way down into our system? And that's where we're going these days, is where the bigger concerns our enterprise customers are having. And I think the world in general, you're seeing all these concerns now about the supply chain, and it's kind of fun for us. We've been doing this for so long, but now there's actually words to explain what we're doing. So now we can actually say the supply chain is under attack, and the open source that you're getting and consuming is having problems. And that's where our energy is to continue making open source easy to use in enterprises, and make it safe. So make it so easy that you don't even have to worry about all the other problems. We'll take care of the safety issues and the build complexities and things like that.
And that's certainly what's needed. I'm almost surprised, Scott, with all of the PR, not good PR, that we've seen with open source and software supply chain security, that we haven't seen more people who say, you know what, I've seen enough. I'm not going to do it this way anymore. Right? I think people realize that train's left the station. This is the way we're doing it. We just have to do it better. We have to have solutions that take kind of the risk out of it and give us that confidence to just do it. But we're not going to go back. We're not that's one thing I've learned in also 30 years in technology, right? Time only goes forward. It's impossible just about to roll back time. It only goes in that one direction. So yesterday, you guys announced some big news around this, and I wanted to have you kind of share a little bit with our audience, if it's okay.
Oh, absolutely. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, well, I guess what we talked about, our mission is to make open source easy and safe to use. And actually how we do that, and this is something we've been doing for a bit, is we have created a secured build service for building, compiling, delivering, and deploying open source components from the internet to your various infrastructure. And yesterday, we're excited to announce the release of our artifact repository, which is combined to our secure build service. So now you can come to us, and especially if you're a Python user, you can automatically plug in the pip protocol and grab components that come directly from our services. So all the components, so imagine having a pip repository for feeding the Python dependencies to your microservices, but knowing that the components are coming through a secured supply chain. So what I like to say is, don't bother setting up your own supply chain. Come to ActiveState. We have one set up for you, and we can plumb all of those packages directly into your build infrastructure. And doing that allows you to then go back and audit each of those individual components, see exactly how it was built, find out how it was sourced, how it was provisioned, and be able to completely monitor the SBOMs that you're consuming from us as you're delivering to your pipeline.
Love it. Great idea. What gives me the confidence that you're doing a better job than I am?
Oh, so one thing that we do uniquely compared to everybody else is, you've probably been hearing about SBOMs. They're like kind of all the rage, which is...
Yeah, no, they say, well, yeah, even at our...
So we do the DevSecOps Day at RSA every year.
Yeah.
This year it's Monday, back to Monday at the Moscone Center. Last year was Tuesday. But last year we had Alan Friedman and some other folks from the government, as well as I think a doctor from Intel. We had a whole SBOM panel going. It was the highlight of the day. So
Right.
Yes, it's big news.
Yeah, so everybody's talking about SBOMs, and I always find it funny because not a lot of people understand what you're supposed to do with them or how you build them in the first place. But what we noticed is everybody will, they business as usual, they build their open source software, they deploy it on the machines. And then when they need an SBOM, they make these tools to go back and scan and try to retroactively figure out what the SBOM is supposed to be. We kind of looked at it, we're like, that isn't the right way to be secure and be managed. So we flipped the script on the head. What we do first is, based on your software dependencies, your requirements, we have technology that can calculate and figure out what the SBOM should be. So based on your dependencies, these exact specific binaries must exist and must be built. And then we have a system that takes that SBOM and constructs that software from open source. Everything we deliver to our customers and stuff that comes through our system is built ourselves, is built in hermetically sealed environments so that the outside world can't come back in and contribute it and manipulate it. And then we end up actually producing the complete SBOM. And so then when we deliver our technology or those components to our customers based on that technology, what we can do that's different from everybody else is, these are the exact binaries that must be in here with these exact checksums. If you have anything else different on your machine, you have a problem or that needs to be upgraded. But we do it. The other part of it is, we don't just stop in one ecosystem. So if we are doing something like Python, our system has modeled the software dependencies all the way down to the native C libraries for every operating system that you have. And so we can say, okay, you might have an environment where you've got Mac, Windows, and Linux. This is exactly the manifest of materials that must be there. And so now we plug that on top of our artifact system.
I love it. So that is really flipping on its head. So instead of like building out your system and then saying, okay, let me make a list of what I got here, for my SBOM, you are creating an SBOM as almost a recipe, and then, baking your software based upon the SBOM recipe, which is really, really cool. Let me ask another question. Often, and it's been our experience, Log4j and things like this, right? What happens is, today, I don't know of any vulnerability in this particular component. Mm-hmm. And so you grab that component and you put it in your hermetically sealed kind of, ingredients for my application. Tomorrow, we discover a bug, vulnerability, whatever you want to call it, weakness in one of those components that's in your hermetically sealed recipe. But I didn't know it when I put it in, but I know it now. And maybe I deployed something with it already, or I didn't yet. How do I recognize that? Update what's been deployed. Update the next time I'm going to use it. Is that part of this?
Yeah. So that's actually what the ActiveState platform does today. So we figure out the SBOMs that should be there, and what we have done is we're constantly cataloging the internet for all open source that is ever released. We bring it into an immutable database, which is we call our catalog. This is the source that's available for us. We then generate the SBOMs ahead of time, and from there we convert the SBOMs, the actual binaries that you need to have, and to deploy that. But we wrap this all in a nice self-serve UI. So the things that we can do is we can tell you the vulnerabilities you're going to get today if you install these components. Even today, if you run out there and pip install something, maybe even install something or do any of these kind of package management things, chances are you're already going to get a component with a vulnerability. We can tell you at install time what vulnerabilities you're going to have and whether they're acceptable or not, give you that data available. But because we're so driven off of the SBOM, we're constantly then monitoring various data sources for known vulnerabilities, new package releases. And because we have that complete picture, we can tell you, okay, this component that was vulnerable free at the time now has a critical vulnerability. And if you're managing your projects using our self-serve platform from that, we can give you that complete visibility of here's all of the projects you have, but we take it a step further. We go down to not only these are the components you should be using, we actually tell you where those SBOMs have been deployed down to the individual machines. So you've got this machine with these dependency problems, and it's vulnerable right here. It just needs to get a couple of updates to go over. And we also flip the script around. Sometimes we'll tell our customers, because we have a technology we call speculative build. We know the SBOM you're supposed to have. If we see an update, we see a vulnerability in an update package released, we actually can rebuild all of your complete your software for you ahead of time and let you know if it's going to work or not. We can tell you, don't even bother trying to get vulnerability, because even though it's been fixed in this current dependency you have, somewhere deep down in your dependency stack, it doesn't like the new update. Don't even try to deploy it. And I actually think that's the number one reason vulnerabilities stay around, is because you spend so much time getting your application built and all these dependencies in place,
and I don't have the time to fix them.
Right.
And if it's going to break the app, I take my chances.
Yeah. And so
unfortunately, that's the truth, right? That's been a truth, a dirty truth in security for a long time.
If it ain't broke, I don't want to fix it unless I really, really have to. And so we're trying to flip that script around, being, well, we can monitor what you have. We can figure out if it's all going to work and be vulnerability free. And then using our platform notifications and the UI, you can find out these are the components. Oh, I can get an update, and it's safe to take that update, not only from a security standpoint, from the fact that I'm not going to take production down when I bring that update down, because that's just equally as bad. I passed the security thing, but I killed my entire production stack is the other side of that. Yeah,
this is the lesser of two evils here now.
Right.
Scott, you sold me. How do people out here get it? What do we do here? What do we have to do?
Well, you go to ActiveState.com. You can sign up for a free account. We offer our services, or anybody who's using open source can use us for personal projects, or if you're an open source community, we make all of the functionality we give to enterprises for free with to open source communities. But anybody can go get started. And it's just simple as signing up on our platform. You can link your GitHub repository. You can link your GitHub account to us. We can scan your repositories, tell you what dependencies they have in it. And then we produce this thing called a runtime, which is based off of that SBOM that we're producing. And then we have various deployment mechanisms that you can plug this into your various software stacks. So you can drop it into your CI/CD systems. We have a package manager that provides all of these capabilities, so you can use it in your local development environments. But just go right to ActiveState.com, get an account, start playing with some of the language ecosystems that we serve, and you can get in touch. Got forums and everything else like that to talk about what we're doing and how we can help.
I love it. And just one more time for the audience, this new service, what's it called?
We call it the ActiveState Artifact Repository, and that's sitting on top of the ActiveState platform today, which is, so the ActiveState platform is our secured build service for sourcing, compiling, building, monitoring open source components that you need. And now the repository lets you use those components that we're building through some of your favorite package manager protocols. Specifically, the one we're launching right now is the PyPy protocol.
Got it. Hey, Scott, thanks for jumping on and sharing with us. I appreciate it. Keep up the great work, man. Come back and keep us posted on what's happening at ActiveState.
Absolutely, Alan. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Scott Robertson, CTO ActiveState, here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our next guest.